Know how the electoral college votes are determined. Remember, it's the amount of the amount of House of Representative members in that state plus 2. Remember that there's 538 votes available, and you need 270 to win. Know how Maine and Nebraska are different in that their electoral colleges are set up based off of the person who wins the popular vote. Gets two electoral college votes, and whoever wins the remaining districts gets 1 electoral college votes. Because remember, it's spread up into districts. Know that usually people will stick to what the popular vote wants in each state. Electors seldom disregard what the popular vote goes through. About 99% of the time, electors who are chosen by the parties will stay with the party and not vote against them. And, a lot of states have laws that forbid you from, if you're an elector, forbid you from voting against what the popular vote is. Also remember that the closest election in the past 30 years was the Bush versus Gore. We watched a documentary about that. And currently, as of now, California has 55 electoral college votes. That's going to change. It's going to probably go down to 54, and that won't happen until the 2024 election. So something just to keep in mind. Know some of the causes of the Great Depression. Remember the stock market crashing. A lot of laissez-faire policies that were out there, and kind of a lot of disinterest from the government caused the Great Depression. But more importantly, it's the stock market crashing in October of 1929, and that didn't help. It didn't help that we also had, year-long droughts with poor farming practices, and created something called the Dust Bowl, where a lot of crops were ruined and a lot of livestock died. So we saw people fall even more into debt. And know about some of the things that got out of the Depression, especially the New Deal and some of the programs that were put into place to get people back to work. A lot of public works programs and stuff like that. Okay, I'm going to also want you to know about World War II. Sorry about that. We're going to talk about isolationism, and originally about 94% of the population wanted to remain out of the war in the early 30s and in the mid 30s, and even there was a movement or an amendment trying to get a national referendum where citizens would vote on a declaration of war as opposed to Congress declaring war. That was something called the Ludlow Amendment. So what the Ludlow Amendment was and how it sought to have a national referendum if we were going to get into war. It fell about 40 votes short. So just remember that. Know that what were the factors that led to the bombing of Pearl Harbor by the Japanese? One of it was the Dutch governor of the West Indies cut off oil supply to Japan, and that really upset him. There was already tensions, which we talked about. Know what Lend-Lease program was and how FDR lent the Allies both money and technology or war. Trying to think of the word. Sorry, like ammunition and technology and tanks and all that stuff to the Allied powers. No, originally that it was about, when we talk about drafted personnel and enlisted personnel, was roughly about 70-30. About 70% of the population was drafted and about 30% enrolled after. Another thing that we kind of talk about is the Holocaust and how the UN, it was found that they may have been cognizant of the Holocaust in 1942, but the official story was we didn't find out about it until 1944. The Battle of Iwo Jima and the Battle of Guadalcanal are two battles that happened in the Pacific theater that turned the war, as well as the Battle of Normandy, which was in the European theater, which turned the war on that side. So these were three pivotal battles, one in the European theater and two in the Pacific theater, as well as the Battle of Okinawa, which was one of the major turning points in the war. So just know what happened in some of the goals and the victories that came out of those two battles and the amount of deaths that we had. Know what the events with the USS Panay was and how Hitler rose to power. I mean, it's not going to be really that in depth, but just kind of know the generalities about how Hitler took positions of power and how he invaded different neighboring countries by using a blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg means an aggressive form of offensive warfare. Now know the Cold War, know the start dates, know the first, second Cold Wars. We'll talk about it. We talked about it in class, but sometimes I don't think the Cold Wars ever stopped. The tensions between the U.S. and the Soviets, now the Russians, which started after World War II, and I still think there's still some hard feelings there. Know what the Berlin Wall was and kind of the how Winston Churchill referred to the spread of communism as an Iron Curtain, which was between East and West, and kind of divided by the Berlin Wall. So know what the Iron Curtain is, and don't worry so much about Alger Hiss. We're not going to talk about him that much, but there is some good information in the book about him. Know about the Korean War and how it was a path to push against the spread of communism in Southeast Asia, and how it was actually the United States fighting against the North Koreans. And there was a TV show called MASH that was on longer than the Korean War actually happened. So, remember that. And also know Joe McCarthy and his Red Scare and some of the tactics where he accused people of being communist without due process, and it ruined a lot of people's lives. Okay? So that's what will be on the exam. Just remember to look at the study guides and look at this video repeatedly, and you should do okay. All right? Thanks a lot. Okay, everybody. So this is going to be a review video for the exam that we're going to have. This exam will cover weeks 10, 11, and 12. More specifically, it'll cover legislative branch, executive branch, judicial branch, and the best years. So let's go ahead and look at the study guide and kind of, fill this in and put it on your 3x5 card. Know what a filibuster is and the way to end a filibuster. You end a filibuster with something called cloture vote. Know the bill amendment process. We drew it up on the board when a bill becomes a law. Remember that most times it is done where you're going to see a lot of the amendments made during the floor vote, and that's going to be the most important time. Know the benefits. Why what might be CFER might be out there for accepting term limits. Usually, it'll be more competitive open seats elections. So, kind of remember that. Know what smart money is and how smart money usually goes to incumbents. Incumbents win about 90% of the time. In a legislator's district, know that the people who are most relevant constituents are the people in their district. All right. And know that kind of the control of the House has gone back and forth in the 21st century. It'll be Democrat control a couple of years and Republican control and so on. It goes back and forth. Know what pork is and how senators and representatives try to bring federal money home to their district. That's an example of pork. Okay. Also, know how to end a filibuster, like I said, cloture vote. Know what the California legislature is made up, how the California legislature is made up of the Assembly and the Senate. Know that the president of the Senate is the vice president, and that's the vice president has a role in breaking the ties in the Senate. Don't worry about gerrymandering right now. Know the processes of impeachment. And like I said, know that filibuster ends by cloture vote. Okay, going to the best years. Know that people are moving out west and that California became the most popular state. Also know that we became more of a religious country as well between 1945 and 1955, where we saw church membership grow. and the growth of religion really had an influence. And Eisenhower, who was the president, tried to make the U.S. a more religious country by, establishing a national day of prayer, using the words "under God" in the Pledge of Allegiance, "In God We Trust" on our money. Know what domino theory is, and how the belief that if communism fell and one country fell to communism, other countries around it may fall. Know what some of the tensions were that kind of were exacerbated between the U.S. and the USSR. The shooting down of a spy plane, the arms race, Khrushchev, who was premier of Russia at one time, walking out of a peace summit. Those all kind of exacerbated the tensions and almost led to World War III. We had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and remember how that failed. Most of the Cuban exiles were either killed or imprisoned, and it wasn't really an effective operation because the Cubans knew there was coming, and they moved all their important military pieces out of the way. And it was a big concern that it was a big concern because Miami and Florida is so close to Cuba. It's only 90 miles away from that, and kind of the influence of communism was worrisome that it would be so close to the United States. Okay, let's go to the next one. Let's go to week 11. So we'll talk about the executive branch now. So remember the executive branch. What are the president's functions for elites? Proposing policy initiatives, mobilizing influence within the system, supervising the management of the government and the economy are all kind of functions that the president has for elites. Sometimes presidents get the blame for economic cycles, but sometimes it's really not their fault, but they're held responsible anyway. Know that we have, the 5 functions of the presidency. Social stability, have to feel secure, a symbol of unity, kind of a mother substitute in a Freudian sense as well, which is mentioned in the book. But when we talk about presidential power, remember the president's real power is to persuade people to buy into his agenda. Also, remember the president is limited by what's called the War Powers Act. The War Powers Act restricts the ability of the president to make war. They can only send troops to an armed conflict for up to 60 days without congressional approval. After 60 days, they have to get congressional approval. Know about presidential vetoes and how often president vetoes are sustained. How many times have they gotten overridden? Remember, presidential vetoes are usually sustained about 96% of the time, so only about 4% of the vetoes get overridden. Know what the president's formal duties are. One of the things that is not a formal duty of the president is leading the political party. Even though they're seen as kind of the leader of the party, they're really not. They're not the head of the party. So Biden is not the head Democrat. It's actually Tom Perez, who's the president of the Democratic National Commission. Trump isn't the main Republican. Romney McDaniel is. So just kind of remember that. Remember, the president will have immunity from civil suits that arise out of their official duty. So the president is within the scope of their job duties. They can't be sued for any action. Know that 3 presidents have been impeached, but none have been removed. We've seen Andrew Johnson impeached, Bill Clinton impeached, Donald Trump impeached twice, but none of them were removed. Know that Richard Nixon was forced from office because he committed a crime. He resigned. Know what Obamacare is and the Patient Protection and Affordable Health Care Act, which sets up a single-payer national health care system. And in a sense, it also kind of requires all states to provide health insurance. We also talked about some of the reasons that Clinton imposed limits on welfare. Wanted to try to make people not be as dependent on welfare. Know what Reaganomics is and how Reaganomics is decreasing taxes on the wealthy, where it would trickle down benefiting the economy. It'll trickle down to the lower earners, but that doesn't really happen at times. Know who Gerald Ford was, and how Ford was the only vice president to never be elected, and we talked about that. Um, know that with Clinton, his approval rating actually went up. Uh, know that the president is head of government and also chief of state. Know that Dick Cheney had some very real powers inside the government. He was a really big influence on the Bush administration. We talked about this in class. Obama's primary foreign policy victory was the killing of Osama bin Laden. And we know the things of impeachment. In a presidential case, the House of Representatives will bring the charges, and the Senate will act as a jury. All right, so know that. Don't worry about the Great Recession. We're not going to talk about that in the exam. Okay, moving on to the judicial branch. Let's talk a little bit about the judicial branch. Okay, be able to tell me what judicial restraint is. And that's kind of the idea that the court won't engage in policy making. The opposite of judicial activism is where the court will go out and seek cases to rule on. Know that the jurisdiction of the court, who do they have jurisdiction over? The federal courts have jurisdiction over federal cases, and these cases are prosecuted by the Department of Justice, so I want you to remember that. Know what a writ of certiorari is, and we're going to talk about that. In what a writ of certiorari is basically an order that the Supreme Court gives to other courts to give them any type of documentation about prior cases that they're ruling on. Know that in the Supreme Court, they hear only about 300 cases a year. You have about 8,000 appealed, and generally they'll hear about 300. Know that the court won't formulate a rule of constitutional law broader than required by the precise facts for which it is applied. So basically what I'm saying is the court will only focus on what the issue is. They can't go outside the scope of that. Know that the U.S. Supreme Court will have jurisdiction over the California Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court can either uphold or deny any cases that are made by the Supreme Court of California. So the Supreme Court makes a decision. The United States Supreme Court can override that decision. No examples of federal crimes. And that some federal crimes might be something like transporting drugs across the border, transporting people across the border, transporting maybe guns across the border. And most cases in federal court will be heard at the district court level. All right? Know the levels of the court system. In California, know that we have the trial courts at the very bottom, then a court of appeals in the middle, and the California Supreme Court at the top. Know that we're going to have experience, like I said in class, that we may have experience in one area of the California trial courts in our lifetime, and that is maybe traffic court. Know the Windsor case, United States versus Windsor. And we'll talk about, know what amicus curiae is, how amicus curiae is basically a friend of the court brief, where anybody that might have an interest in the case, the Supreme Court may ask them to give some type of brief about how that might affect it. Know what stare decisis means in the concept of precedent, where generally if a court case has already been decided, it's rare that the courts will go in and re-review it, but it could happen. All right? So know the concept of original intent as well. And that's what we got for this section. If you have any questions, definitely let me know. Okay, thank you.